I think that shift to a more partnering approach to understand much more of how your customer views value and opening a dialogue about that, I think then allows law firms to have, first of all, a reason to invest in technology, but also some focus on what technology is meaningful to their customers.
Today on Law Next, just out from Wolters Kluwer Legal and Regulatory is its third Future Ready Lawyer Survey report, documenting the top trends affecting legal professionals and looking at how well prepared law firms and legal departments are to address them. And given that this year's report comes in the wake of the global pandemic, it also considers the events of 2020 and their impact on the profession now and into the future. To discuss the report and share their insights on it, I'm joined by two top executives from Wolters Kluwer, Martin O'Malley, the Executive Vice President and Managing Director of Wolters Kluwer Legal and Regulatory Worldwide, and Dean Sonderegger, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Wolters Kluwer Legal and Regulatory US. I am Bob Ambrogi, and you are listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to today's conversation, allow me to tell you about one of the sponsors who supports Law Next. Want to get paid faster? Let your clients check out, not cut checks? E-payments have arrived at Bill for Time with the new built-in payments processor, Bill for Time Payments. Designed for legal professionals, Bill for Time Payments is a secure and compliant way to process your clients' payments. The easy-to-use feature offers industry-low transaction fees and 0 monthly add-ons. Make the switch to Bill for Time to manage every aspect of your cases from start to finish and start receiving payments 70% faster. Learn more at billfortime.com. That's bill, the number 4, time.com. Now, on to today's conversation. Martin and Dean, great to speak with you today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks,
Bob. Great to be here.
So before we get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about today, I gave you each a very brief introduction, but let me ask each of you to tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do. And Martin, why don't you start us off, joining us from Amsterdam today?
Sure. Bob, great to be here. I'm the Executive Vice President and Managing Director for Legal and Regulatory. And I've been in this position for actually just a little bit over a year. I consider myself a pandemic baby in the sense I started the role from home. I've worked for 4 years with Wolters Kluwer, and Legal and Regulatory is one of the 4 divisions of the company overall. And I'm very pleased to be to join today.
Yeah, how's that been starting in that role in perhaps the worst of timing?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Actually, I think my team is global, so I manage a team across 10 countries in Europe and the US. And I think it's certainly been difficult not being able to get out and see the team. But at the same time, I think the fact that we work with teams has meant that we've probably become remotely actually closer. And I think what strikes me is that I think our reach into the organizations and I think our contact with our customers through that period has just actually strengthened. And we see that back both in employee satisfaction, but also in customer satisfaction. So that's something I'm very pleased with. So I would say, all things said and done, I think I'm pretty happy with the way the year has gone.
That's really interesting. Dean Sonderegger, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Thanks, Bob. So, Dean Sonderegger, I'm also at Wolters Kluwer, whereas Martin is globally focused on legal and regulatory. My focus is much more on the U.S. market. I've been in Wolters Kluwer for about 6 years, and previously I worked at a company which shall remain unknown or unnamed, but is owned by the former mayor of New York City. But I've been around this market for quite some time at this point in time, and we're obviously focused in on how it is the market itself is moving, both from a law firm standpoint and corporate legal, and trying to plug into these trends and really the evolution of legal technology, which is a fascinating topic and one that's really the focus of the survey. And so delighted to be here and to get a chance to talk about that.
Yeah. And as you say, we are here today to talk about this latest Future Ready Lawyer Survey report. This is the third time you've done this report. but comes in unusual circumstances this time. But Dean, maybe you could tell us first kind of what the idea is behind the background and why you do this report and what the idea of the report is.
Yeah, sure. So I think that the general idea is to take a look at how lawyers are interacting with or what the relationship with technology is, Bob. And I think that the interesting thing is to say, are there differences that we see between corporate legal and between law firms, so inside and outside counsel? And are there differences that we see in the U.S. versus the EU? And so what we do is we survey about 700 respondents across the U.S. and 9 countries in Europe. And we ask them a number of questions. When we talk about future-related questions, we talk about things over an outlook of about of the next 3 years. And then we try and pull out interesting perceptions out of that. And we have a number of questions that we have baselined across the 3 years that we've done. And then we, of course, not only do we publish that into the marketplace, but we try and use that ourselves to understand how to better serve our clients.
Something interesting about this year's report is that, in effect, this year's report and last year's report kind of bookend the pandemic. The prior report came out in January 2020. This one is coming out now. Martin, as you looked at this, we'll drill down into the report in more detail. But as you looked at this, what was kind of the headline for you? What was the biggest takeaway that struck you as you read through these results?
Yeah, so I think the one of the headlines is that the pandemic really accelerated a transformation that has been going on for the last number of years. And if you look at the fact that I think pretty much all of us had to move to working remotely last year, I think the adoption of technology just increased. And I think what's coming through very strongly in the report is that the continuous use of an investment of technology is going to continue to increase. What you also see, I think, is that technology was a lifeline for businesses in the last period to make sure that they moved ahead. And the players that have adopted technology, the technology leaders, really thrived in the period. And I think they will continue to invest in technology. The other thing I think is what we see is that there's a gap between the ambition level and the readiness. And I think that applies to both corporate law as well as law firms. And, I think that's driving some changes also in terms of how organizations are looking at where and how they work, but also the way in which they get things done. So I would say that there's some pressure on the system because there's a gap between where corporate law expect their law firms how they expect them to operate and where they're operating today. So I think some interesting insights coming out of it. But I would say just an acceleration of trends that we've seen happen from the past.
Yeah. Dean, what about from your perspective? What jumped out at you this year?
A couple of things. I think that you see this increased propensity for investment, both from a corporate and from a law firm perspective, just to pick up on Martin's trend there. And I think that that is that acceleration of the trend that was already in place. I think that the other thing that we see is really in the relationship between firms. And one of the things that we see is that there's a fair amount of dissatisfaction, I guess, with law firms of corporate legal with their law firm clients. We asked about 5 attributes: the trust in the firm to meet the needs, that they specialize in the types of services we need, that they use technology to deliver the best services possible, they demonstrate efficiency and productivity, and they equip the staff with the right tools to perform the work. And so we said, please assess your outside providers for this. And the assessment was that fewer than 1/3 of their providers performed these attributes well. And so there's a bit of a disconnect between the activities of law firms and their corporate clients. And that tends to drop down into the sense that about a quarter of the corporate lawyers said that they were very likely to switch firms compared to just about 13% in 2020. So I think that's an interesting trend that we saw accelerate over the period of the pandemic.
And is it fair to say that the report suggested that the firms were less cognizant of this disconnect than were their clients?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think the firms are not as aware and attuned to the exactly what it is. And this is actually a trend that has continued, is that when you ask firms what the most important things are for corporate legal in sourcing outside law firms, and you ask corporate legal, they come up with different answers, which is a bit scary, right, as far as that goes. So it is definitely a little bit of a disconnect there.
So corporate legal is looking at, as I recall, they're looking at things like, they rank technology quite high, and law firms didn't see that quite as high.
That's right. And I think that it's one of those things that it's also, there's a bit of interpretation in that, right? In the sense that when you actually, and I think you've been in the market quite a bit also, Bob, when you start to talk to the corporate legal folks, and this was not exactly in the survey, what you find is it's a drive towards value. And how is it that the law firm is providing the most value? And the sense that I get from talking to clients is that the clients see investment in legal technology as something that helps drive more value for the services that they provide to the corporation. And I think that that's the thing that hasn't quite translated over in its entirety across the law firm market.
Martin, I think I heard you start to say something. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just maybe to build on it. I think the gap in terms of the importance of technology, 82% of CLDs, I say CLDs because I talk of corporate lawyers, see technology has been important with 78% of law firms, so a bit of a gap there. But I think what's interesting is if you look at the expectations between what the corporate lawyers, what they expect versus what they're getting from the law firms, I think that's an opportunity for improvement. So you see, for example, that there is, I would say a genuine dissatisfaction between where what they're getting versus what they're expecting, and even so far as to go that you have firms, 24% of legal departments are likely to switch if they're not seeing, focus on efficiency and productivity. If the technology focus is not there, if they're not equipping their staff with the right tools to perform their work. And I think that's for me an undercurrent in the report, that we talk a lot about how the law firm and the corporate lawyer need to work together, but I think there is in terms of retaining and attracting and retaining talent, technology is also going to be an important driver as well.
Yeah. This report talked about it, and I know you both alluded to this already, but I wonder if we could expand a little bit on the issue of what are the top trends that legal professionals see in legal and how well prepared they are to address those trends. Dean, can you talk a little bit more about that? Or?
Yeah. So, just Bob, to be clear, are you talking about the technology trends, or are you talking about
the two top trends they identified, I think, in the report were technology and also the increasing complexity of information.
Yeah. So I think so just on the technology front, I think 77% of the surveyed group indicated technology as being, the leading thing, and this is again in line with what we saw in 2020. What I think has increased in importance also is the fact that they are struggling to deal with increased volume and complexity of information. So 77% versus 72% in 2020. I think this is also, particularly for corporate lawyers, where they have, I think, the two pressures of more volume of work, more complexity, and budget pressure at the same time. And I think the other pressure is coming from the fact that the law firms are feeling that pressure from their clients. And on the level of preparedness, and you see that pretty much across the board, that where they recognize that they need to adjust and change, the level of preparedness is extremely low. And I would say lower on the law firm side than on the corporate lawyers, but around 30% and down as far as 23% when it comes to machine learning, new technology. So I think there's a big gap there.
I found that surprising given the context of the year in which we're in, only because there has been so much talk about the fact that the events of the past year have accelerated, the importance and most people have said the adoption of technology. And yet it seems that for all that acceleration, there isn't a lot of difference in between this year's report and last year's report in terms of, again, firms sort of ranking their readiness to deal with those issues. Am I reading that correctly?
So I think that I think you are reading that correctly, Bob. I think it's an interesting thing because when I try to interpret that, clearly firms have all adopted remote working, or they're not a going concern anymore, right? So firms have leaned in and made technological changes on a dime because the market demanded it. But I do think that we continue, when we talk about some of the legal technologies out there, and we talk, or technologies in general, artificial intelligence, big data, predictive analytics, I think that we struggle a bit in terms of being able to define a very tight kind of use case or example of how this helps me with my work. And that's probably really more of a vendor issue than a lawyer issue, really, if you think about it. I think in places where you've seen very defined success around this, you've seen the adoption, and we don't even really talk about it so much anymore. So I think that usually, the example I would give is that the use of something like Cura to do contract review in an M&A transaction, that's kind of standard at this point in time. And you see corporate legal departments expecting that as part of your support for M&A. And so I do think you see this evolution that's going on around us. But a lot of but we think about that as document review. We don't necessarily think about that as technology per se. So I think when the broad terms of AI and machine learning and things like that are given out, I think people get a little bit of a deer in the headlights look and say, yeah, I know that's coming to me, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Which results in a lack of sense of preparedness, if you will. And so I think that's rolled forward year over year.
Yeah. Martin, were you going to comment on that as well?
Yeah, and I think the level of preparedness has edged up a little bit, but the gap, I mean, it's undeniably huge still. And I think it's also the gap is coming from different reasons, but I think it's, we all work with teams because we had no choice. I mean, it was and I think that went extremely quickly. But what you see with the adoption of new tools that companies are taking on board, that it requires a change in which the firm does things. And if you continue doing things in the old ways, the tools adoption is low. So I think it requires a little bit of a strategic view on how you think about embedding tools and making it part of how you work. But it also requires, I think, a culture of adapting and the lawyers within a firm actually working in a different way. And I think that's a big change. I think corporate lawyers probably have a little bit of an edge in that, in the sense that if you're working in an environment, if I just think about our corporate lawyers in Wolters Kluwer, they're continuously confronted with technology changes that they need to adapt to, whether it's a people management system or whether it's the tools we use on a daily basis. So I think the willingness to change and adapt, and especially if they become the company standard, I think is higher. So I think that's influencing the adoption rates as well.
Yeah,
and I think, Martin, just to add on to that, I think that one of the things we did ask what the top reason new technology is resisted in organizations and legal professionals said that the most common example of that is organizational issues. And I think that there's a sense of incentive, if you will, in the law firm environment, is that the people who are making decisions are probably removed from the actual lawyering work in a lot of cases. And so you've got this kind of disconnect there also, is that they don't see the direct benefit in the same way until clients lean in and say, hey, we need to have demonstrable examples of how you are using technology to make things better. Having said that, we did ask legal departments whether or not they asked their providers, asked prospective firms about technology use. And the response was that within 3 years, 91% of the legal departments will ask prospective firms about technology use, which is actually a 10-point increase over 2020. And fully 80%, or 4 out of 5 corporate lawyers, say it's important that the firms that they work with leverage technology fully. So I think you will see that pull, if you will, coming from the corporate legal market into the law firm market. And I think that's a continued kind of pull, if you will.
Yeah, and the survey suggested they're expecting that of the firms they're already working with as well, not just prospective firms.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah. And in addition to clients' expectations of their outside firms, what does the survey tell us about how corporate legal departments themselves are using technology?
Yeah, so I think that first, I think technology is always a means to an end, and the key driver, I think, for corporate law departments are the fact that they have bigger workloads with smaller budgets, and we've seen that in a number of studies this year that point to the fact that in the coming there was a survey from Gartner earlier this year where they indicated that about 4% of the legal spend today is on technology, and that's expected to increase to 12% by 2025. And when you look at the top challenges they're addressing through technology, it's looking at automation of routine tasks, it's leveraging technology in the work process, it's looking to reduce costs, and it's also just to manage the increasing demands on the corporate legal department. And this obviously is driven by demands in the business. And what we're seeing is that the corporate legal departments, where they've operated very much in the past as almost a separate functional pillar, have become much more embedded in the routine workings of the company. So if you think about just the dealing with the pandemic, I can tell you in pretty much all of our internal calls that have to do with incident management, preparation for back to office, legal is always involved because there's always a legal element of discussion, and that has just, I think, increased the volume of work that's coming to them. What the survey is pointing to is that there is an expected increase in investment in technology going from 51% in 2020 to 57% this year. And not surprisingly, the type of technologies they're investing in range from collaboration tools, document work, contract management, also focus on things like corporate e-meetings, e-voting management, and the whole, let's say, workflow around documents. So I would say quite some significant changes there.
This is the third time that Wolters Kluwer has published the Future Ready Lawyer Survey report, but this year's report came on the heels of the most challenging year the legal profession has ever faced. The report looked specifically at the pandemic's impact on the profession and found that the impact was uneven, with some firms suffering drops in their business and others seeing their business increase. When we return, we'll talk about these findings, but first, let's hear from one of the sponsors who so generously supports Law Next. When perspectives shift, possibilities unfold. That's why Paradigm has brought together 4 world-class legal software solutions to push the standard for legal technology into the future. With Practice Panther, Bill for Time, Maris Case, and the online payment solution HeadNote, Paradigm empowers lawyers across the spectrum of practice areas, geography, and business needs. Learn more at joinparadigm.com. Welcome back to Law Next. We're talking about the recently released Wolters Kluwer Future Ready Lawyer Survey report with Wolters Kluwer Executive Vice President Martin O'Malley and Senior Vice President Dean Sonderegger. The report looks at the top trends affecting legal professionals and the preparedness of law firms and legal departments to address them. There is perhaps no greater trend impacting the profession right now than the pandemic and its impact on law firms, legal departments, and the practice of law. As we return to our conversation, I ask O'Malley and Sonderegger about the survey's findings related to the pandemic and their own perceptions of the pandemic's impact. The survey this year, as I mentioned earlier, looked specifically at the impact of the pandemic on the business of law. And it seems that the results, or what it found, was that the impact was somewhat uneven. That some firms saw their business go down, other firms actually saw their business increase.
Yeah.
Dean, what do you think accounts for that? What did the survey find in that regard, and how do you explain the discrepancies?
Yeah, I think that there's a bit of a trend that continues as we go forward year over year with the survey here, which is the technology leaders, if you will, which are organizations that are actively investing in technology, tend to do better. And so I think that they were more likely to report than their peers that were either planning on investing in technology or were not planning on investing in technology. We would say that they've been more likely to report that their business increased despite the pandemic. And we saw that almost half of the technology leaders said that they were very prepared to support clients remotely when the pandemic began, compared to about 20% of what we call transitioning firms, so firms that plan to invest but are not actively investing, and 8% of the trailing organizations, which are the organizations that are not investing at all. So I think that when you see that the transition that occurred to remote work in March of last year, the technology leaders, the folks that were already more comfortable with investments in technology, were much more able to make that transition smoothly. I think that impacted their ability to continue serving their clients in a timely fashion. And I think that the trend that we see continue year over year with that is that overall the technology leading firms are more profitable than their peers. So almost 1 in 2 of the technology leading firms reported increased profitability in the past year, compared to about 3 in 10 of the transitioning and about 15% or so of the trailing firms. So I think that speaks to the ongoing influence of the technology. I'm not sure, as I sit here and talk about it, if it's a chicken or an egg thing, which is to say that the firms that are doing better are more able to invest in technology. I don't think we tested for causality, but there definitely seems to be a correlation between the firms investing in technology and the financial results.
Yeah, I mean, to some of us, it would seem, to some of us who've been following this stuff for a while, it would seem obvious, but maybe not to everybody. And as you say, maybe there isn't really a straight line correlation, but certainly would have seemed that the firms that were more invested and better prepared in terms of technology would just in every other way have fared better over the past year.
Yeah, and I think that, Bob, I think that when you look at the market also, if you were to go back to the April timeframe or so of 2020, we saw a lot of furloughs with associates and support staff, librarians, and knowledge management people. We saw reduced partner payouts or cessation of them for a period of time. And you did see in the fourth quarter of last year a number of firms reporting record profits per partner. You saw a lot of those things reversed. And so I think that you saw firms that really came out of the pandemic quite well, and then some that did not. The other thing I think that was really fascinating to me was that on the heels of the end of the year and some very good profits, we've seen this rush to increase associate salaries.
Yeah.
And I think a reversing of all the furloughs. And it seems like the other thing that's coming off of this is that the fight for talent is becoming much more difficult, I guess, if you will. So there seems to be much more of a battle for the talent that's coming in. And I've got to think that, and this was not part of the survey, but I've got to think that I'd be much more interested as a young lawyer going in and working at a firm that's a bit more forward looking from a technology standpoint and that has a progressive in and out of the office hybrid kind of working model than a firm that is struggling with that at this point in time.
Yeah, you would think it would be a hiring factor or a recruiting factor, rather, in terms of hiring the best talent. I know certainly in other industries, in tech in particular, that's very much the case, right? The big tech companies are saying, forget about ever having to come into the office. We don't care if you ever come in. What else, are there other findings in this survey about ways in which some of the changes we saw over the past year or some of the adaptations firms made over the past year are likely to continue forward?
Yeah, when you look at the survey says post pandemic, and I guess where you were post pandemic is we're not there yet, but
we're knocking on wood. We're keeping our fingers crossed, whatever.
I guess we are, yeah, and hoping the Delta variant doesn't go out of control. But basically, what it's saying is that there are, the need for technology solutions that we've seen is just going to continue and would be critical to deliver services, and that's like 91% of the survey participants, which I think is huge. It also, I mean, if you look at the investments that firms are making, document management, collaboration, I think with expectation that people will continue to work remotely, contract management, Cloud, I think, becoming more and more, particularly for law firms, where I would say at least my read on that is that they were probably less cloud ready when they had to work from home than a lot of their corporate colleagues. So I think that is a big driver. And I think that the indications are, that their employees will continue to use, 73% of their employees will continue to use multiple devices for work. And, digital communication will continue. So a lot of I would say, the enablers, the enabling technology of just allowing people to work anywhere, anytime, they're kind of here to stay. And I think what just, we're talking early on about, the advantage the technology leaders have. You would argue that, they've invested in technology, they're there, but 65% of the technology leaders expect to still invest more in technology. So they're not done. And I think that's something that we see, I think, more broadly, that it's, you've got a group that are kind of, struggling to catch up, and you've got a group that are I think, working hard to stay ahead, and driven by the expectation that the client demands are going to continue to accelerate or increase.
Martin, I know the survey did not look expressly at differences in different parts of the world, particularly between the U.S. and Europe, but just given the global perspective that you have in your day job, what have you seen? I mean, how does what you saw in this report compare to what you're hearing and seeing out there on the market?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is that if you look at the bigger firms, I would say it's pretty consistent across what we see in the US and Europe. I think the smaller firms, and again, that's not unique to Europe, but I think they struggled a little bit more at the start of the pandemic in terms of, working from home, because they just weren't as technology ready. What we also see, I think, is interesting. We had Jeroen Swiers. He worked at one of the firms here in Amsterdam on a similar call to this earlier this week. And he made the point that, that the investment in technology that has been made, that we're talking about globally, has applied to the Dutch firms. You see the same in the UK. But the cultural issues in terms of technology adoption, the gap that we see is pretty much consistent across the different countries. So I would say all in all, pretty similar patterns across the US and Europe. So no big differences.
Yeah. And Dean, are you seeing anything different, or does that comport with what you're seeing?
It does. I think that the thing I think that's a bit different between, say, the U.S. and European markets, from what I've been able to see, is I think that we're a little further advanced in the adoption of legal operations as a methodology, if you will, in the U.S. corporate legal circles than we are in Europe, and I think that then is probably putting pressure on the firms themselves in a couple of different ways. And I guess it's been an interesting market from a legal standpoint. I've heard it described as a bifurcation, if you will, of services. And there are services that are highly impactful from a business standpoint, and those could be restructuring. It could be large scale M&A. It could be a significant litigation that are going on. And it seems to be in the U.S. market right now, it's almost a blank check for those types of things. Corporate legal, they have to spend the money. They're going to get the best that they can find. And at the same time, I think that we're seeing this extreme circumspection around legal spend that doesn't fall into those categories. So more the commoditized work. And I think that's being driven in part by the economy, but part by the legal ops movement. And so then you see this bears out in the survey in the sense that you see 3 out of 4 legal departments planning to make greater use of third-party or outsourced resources, insourcing of legal work, contract staff, ALSPs, and so on and so forth. And those are all increased over 2020. So I think that that's the thing that you're seeing a bit more movement on, is the insourcing of some of that work that might have traditionally been done by outside counsel. And I think you see a little bit more of that in the large, impacting the large firms than you do those mid to small size firms, as Martin referenced.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think maybe the flip side of that is that for law firms, what you also see coming out of the survey is that there's an increased specialization of legal services. I think, less focus on the more routine tasks and more specialization. But also, I think the discussion around greater use of alternative fee arrangements. Also, at 72%, quite high. And I think this is just reflecting again, the pressure from the corporate clients simply for alternatives. So I think that's also mirroring, the demands they're seeing on the corporate legal side.
Yeah. At the outset of this conversation today, I asked you both about what you saw as the top headlines or top takeaways out of this survey. What's the message for law firms? What should law firms take away from this? What should they do differently or the same based on what's found in this report? Dean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it starts off with their clients, right? So I think that law firms really should think about their relationship with their clients from a partnership ongoing standpoint and less from a single provision of services. And some firms do this really well and some firms struggle to do this. But I think that shift to a more partnering approach to understand really much more of how your customer views value and opening a dialogue about that, I think then allows law firms to have, first of all, a reason to invest in technology, but also some focus on what technology is meaningful to their customers. And so I think that's really the key thing that comes out of this for me.
Martin, what do you say?
Yeah. Maybe to add to that, I mean, there's an interesting section in the report which talks about the gaps in expectations and experience. And I think if I were a law firm and I was kind of sitting, on the other side of the table, or I was advising a law firm, I would probably be saying, if you look at the expectations from their corporate clients, technology, the fact that they want them to demonstrate use of technology to deliver the best service, the fact that they're expecting them to use that to drive productivity, that they're equipping their staff, and that 70% are saying they have a very clear view on what they need, what's important to them, but fewer than 30% say these attributes describe the current firm well. I would find that quite alarming because I think that's a pretty big gap. So I think there is an opportunity, and I think we touched a little bit on this earlier on, there's just a big opportunity for room for improvement. And I think the technology leaders are probably the ones that are going to grasp that opportunity faster because, 24% of corporate legal are saying that they're willing to switch firms. That's up from 13% in 2020. I find that astounding, actually, because it seems like the dissatisfaction levels are actually increasing rather than decreasing.
That is interesting. And one of the when you ask law firms what they think the top criteria clients apply to them is their ability to understand client needs, which is important and not to be undermined. But you would think that if law firms were really even pursuing that criteria, that dissatisfaction would not be down. So I've been asking you both lots of questions, and we're getting near the end of our time here. I just wanted to give each of you an opportunity to share any further or closing thoughts that you wanted to share with regard to this report. And Dean, let me start with you.
Yeah, I think that the net of it for me is that we've seen across 3 years right now that the firms that invest in more technology on average do better than their peers. And I think that in each of the years you see different propensities for them to continue investing, but by and large the technology leaders, if you will, are continuing to invest more in technology. And so one has the question of, does this lead to a situation of haves and have-nots as you go through into the future for the law firms? And I think that from my perspective, I think you do see that. I think you see some firms starting to really thrive and being able to not only maintain high rates go through, but expanding business with their clients and having to turn away business in some case. And you see other businesses that are struggling, other firms that are struggling. So I think that to me is the takeaway is that now for 3 years in a row, you see that kind of bifurcation of businesses that invest and businesses that do not invest in technology, and you see financial results that come through. So at some point in time, that becomes not a data point, but it becomes more of a trend. And I think that we're at that point.
That's really interesting. And of course, those firms that are among the have-nots, the good news is they can join the other side. They can become have firms, right?
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that's not that's kind of teased a bit in the survey on that, Bob, but I think that they talk about organizational issues. One of the things I think that's just very, very important as part of that is personnel. And any conversation that we get into is the idea of having people that are dedicated to doing this type of work. You had a nice article not too long ago talking about the role of the librarian or the knowledge manager in adoption of legal technology. And I think getting people in whose job it is to help move this forward is essential to being able to make progress in that. So yeah, it's there's no magic to it. Anybody can do it, but I do think that you have to invest not only in the technology, but in the people behind that.
All right. And Martin, do you have any further thoughts to share on this?
Yeah, I mean, Dean has stolen all my tongue there. But, thanks, Dean.
I'm giving you the final word. You can go out with a blast.
Yeah, I think actually what hasn't been talked a lot about or has maybe been touched on is culture here, and I think that there is a significant shift in culture actually happening and needing to happen. So the way I look at it is when I see the big gap between the expectations and where they feel they are today, I think that's an opportunity. But I do think that, and I've heard that also separately on a number of podcasts I've listened to recently, that the relationship between law firms and corporate law are usually close. So they're often built on, years of interaction working with the same people, but they still are at a relative transactional level. And I think one of the words that gets thrown around a lot is partnership. But what I'm reading is, and it's also, I think, because one of the side effects of technology is that it actually is contributing to the fact that there's more information, there's more volume of activity and more pressure on the corporate lawyers, that there is a little bit of a cry for help here in terms of, work with me, understand my business better, and use your technology and the tools to help and support me. And that's how you're going to win. That's what I think is there, where the opportunity is. But it does require a shift in culture and the culture of thinking about, the service philosophy, the deployment of tools, the consistency, and looking at how you support the business objectives of the corporate lawyer rather than just the transactions that you need to service on a case-by-case basis.
So we've been talking about the 2021 Wolters Kluwer Future Ready Lawyer Survey Report. It is available free to download. Google that name, or you can go to my blog, and I've got a link to it there. Martin and Dean, thanks so much for joining me today to talk about the report.
Thank you all much. Thanks, Bob.
My sincere thanks to Martin O'Malley and Dean Sonderegger from Wolters Kluwer for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Another show to check out is Contract Teardown, presented by our sponsor Law Insider on YouTube. Each week, they analyze contracts ranging from Y Combinator's Safe Agreement to Robinhood Financial's Terms of Service. Find them at lawinsider.com/resources. Law Next is produced, engineered, and edited by Populous Radio. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Law Next.